This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss the latest college football playoff rankings, all of the discussion about the Big Ten and the SEC, and Penn State's upcoming matchup against Minnesota. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder, covering Penn State at The Athletic. And Audrey, it has been a wild discourse the last 24 hours about these latest college football playoff rankings.
John, that's not how you say dumb. It's
Yes.
been a dumb, stupid, silly, ridiculous discourse. And can I just say, can we stop with the show every week for the rankings release? Like, it's a confusing product. Like, it's to the point now where I don't even want to watch the show because I just want to see the rankings, and like I don't need to hear the discourse of, hey, like we scoreboard watched and clearly think that Penn State struggled against UCLA. Like, just stop, give me the rankings, and let us all move on with our nights.
We'll get into this. Before we get too far into it, though, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, those 5-star ratings and reviews really help us out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button down below as we continue the march toward 2,000 subscribers. But yes, I found myself, so I usually don't watch like the commentary after the rankings are announced, right? Like I think it is uninformative. There is a group of people discussing the rankings that clearly aren't all that invested in having the most knowledge they can about each of these programs and teams, about the process even. Like, I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding, and this is partially on the college football playoff for this being an issue, about how these rankings go down, like how it happens. There's an argument that Indiana should bench Curtis Rourke, which is the craziest.
Yeah, what the hell is that, John? What is that?
That's an Ohio State grad wanting to make things easier on Ohio State. That's what that is. But like you said, Booger McFarland said that Penn State struggled with UCLA, and that's not true. Couldn't have been further from the truth. They were in complete control of that game the entire time. UCLA scores a garbage time touchdown, and when you scoreboard watch, that's the kind of stuff that happens. You make those kind of assumptions without having the proper amount of information. The discussion about like Indiana not being worthy of being in the playoff if they lose to Ohio State, I think is absurd. This is not a Mountain West school that's going 11-1. This is a Big Ten school, and say what you will about they played the bottom of the Big Ten. The bottom of the Big Ten is better than the middle of most of those other conferences still. And so I think it's ridiculous. It's all very dumb. Like you said, I am incredibly annoyed by all of the hand wringing about the SEC. Like the idea that Tennessee played a tough schedule, so they should be ahead of Penn State, or you know what Tennessee should have done? Beaten Arkansas. Like I tend to put more value in taking care of business when you need to win those games. And if you lose, like losing close to some of the best teams potentially, like the way I always frame it, let's say 119 teams are ranked and you're ranking 120. I know the number is like 134 now or whatever. And you have the last team.
Does Kent State make your rankings, to be clear?
If it's 120, no. But if let's say there's 120 teams in this hypothetical situation, you've ranked 119 of them. If 1 through 6 of your current rankings are your final team is 0-6 against them, and they're undefeated against 7 through 12, then that team you have is the 7th team in the country, right? Like I believe something like that can be true. That example of like, we know for certain that these 6 teams should be ahead and these 6 teams are behind, but it's never that cut and dry, right? Like it's very nebulous. It's you're trying to hit a moving target here. One, these rankings don't matter. If it is true that everything gets re-ranked every week, these rankings don't mean anything. And I've seen even arguments made about, Penn State and Indiana. I've seen people say that, Indiana will end up playing a tougher schedule if they, end up with 2 top 5 wins over Ohio State and Oregon. These rankings aren't made based on games that haven't happened yet. Like it is made based on what has happened so far.
Here we are right now. Yeah. This whole discourse to me this year is exceptionally stupid because we're just like, we're projecting. I say I mean like the college football world, not you and I, John, because we're mostly rational people.
Well,
for the
go
well,
Birds,
except when it comes to our own favorite teams, right? But we're mostly rational in this context, in this sphere. And it just seems like I want to almost ask some of these folks that are spewing this stuff, like, do you actually believe what you're saying? Like, do you understand what you are saying? Because to me, it just seems like we're kind of lining up here to spew hot takes and say, wow, let's go SEC. Georgia, you should totally be in because of the logo on your helmet. And wow, isn't that great? And to me, and we got into this, I know, post game a little bit Saturday night, and it just feels like everything is at a heightened level of stupidity this year, probably because of the 12-team playoff, right? There's more to argue. It's draining and it's exhausting. And it's like, can't we just let the games play out? And like, this is why, John, I don't want to give in and like keep watching the show because it's become like this made for TV type of discourse. And that's not what it should be. It should be, hey, here's our ranking, and let's try to have some clear justification for why we're slotting one team in here this week and one here the next. It also seems like the justifications aren't aligning either. And I'm just kind of find myself wondering, like, sometimes what is the committee maybe watching, or the folks that aren't on the committee that are talking about this, like, what are they watching or not watching, perhaps, maybe is the way to put it. Because the whole thing is just every week, it just seems like it's getting more and more angry and more dumb and more. Let's just let Ohio State and Indiana play this weekend, Saturday at noon, and see what happens, right? Like, it just feels like we're this whole instantaneous society, which I think is kind of a bigger problem. But yeah, like, let the games happen before we start arguing everything.
Everything is so conspiratorial now too with this. Like, Illinois gets announced as the number 25 team in the country to start the ranking show last night, and someone immediately comments on the show that, oh, that'll help justify Penn State's ranking later. Like no, they like, Illinois is a good team. Illinois is 7-3. Yeah. Why is it asinine that Illinois at 7-3 is ranked, but Mizzou at 7-3 being ranked is totally fine, or South Carolina at 7-3, both teams higher than Illinois, which I think is correct, by the way. Why is it crazy that those teams are ranked, but Illinois being ranked with losses to Penn State and Oregon, and then a one possession loss to Minnesota? Like, why is that completely implausible? But Missouri and South Carolina being ranked is perfectly fine. I don't mean to make this like a big, conference versus conference thing where it's the Big Ten versus the SEC. But at the end of the day, like, it's not just the conspiratorial part, it's everyone's becoming territorial too, right? Like, everyone is trying to defend their own, if you will, right? Like, trying to defend
their conference.
Their people or whatever. Like, it's very dumb, and it drives me nuts, and it leads to everyone has bias in all of these discussions, right?
Yeah.
Even the people on the committee. That's why they have 12 of them, right? To try and eliminate some of the bias. They make people leave the room when it's a program that's affiliated with them. But even then, like, you will have biases against conferences or for conferences, just inherently. That's what bias is. And a lot of time people aren't aware of those biases or aren't acknowledging them. And that's why you have those 12 people, though, to try and eliminate as much of that as you can. I just think there's also a lack of not a lack of transparency, a lack of messaging on how it's decided, right? They group teams in threes when they rank them. Like, they rank the first three teams, and then the second group of three teams, and the next group of three teams. And so when you look within the clusters, the rankings are probably more accurate than they are as a whole 1 to 25, right? Like, like, you're not necessarily ranking you're not ranking number 5 with number 17 in mind, or number 6 with number 24 in mind. It is, you are ranking 4, 5, and 6 based on those three teams that you have, and another small pool of teams that are available based on voting and everything. Like, this is not a straightforward process. They've tried to eliminate bias by doing it in groups like that, and I actually think that's a really good way to do it, and to try and make them as accurate as possible. I just think they don't like put that out there enough, that this is how this process goes, that like Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas were ranked 1 through 3. And then they went on, they didn't compare in that grouping. They compared Texas and Penn State, but once Texas is number 3, they're not a part of the discussion anymore. It moves on to the next group of 3, right? Where they end up with Penn State, Indiana, Notre Dame, probably had like Bama, Miami, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Boise State, all in that discussion. But once you're ranked, you're not a part of those discussions when it comes to determining your ranking as they move down this list. So all that is to say is, again, they're not thinking about number 4 when they're ranking 1 through 3. They're thinking about numbers 1, 2, and 3, and that can make this a little hard to understand at times, I think. But at the end of the day, I think it helps eliminate some of the bias, even though I do think having Texas at Penn State is probably incorrect at this point.
It is a conversation that is taking a lot of air, a lot of oxygen these days, John. And here's what I will say on all of this, because again, like you hit on it earlier, doesn't really matter much once we come down the stretch here. Like, we're going to know a lot more after this weekend how these games play out, especially as it relates to Penn State. We talked with Drew Aller this week. Obviously, we heard from James Franklin. This is not something that they are watching inside the football building. Like, they're not gathering around their TVs Tuesday night trying to see where Penn State's ranked. One of the interesting things I think we're going to see this year with the 12-team playoff, right? So the way it would align this week would be Georgia coming to Beaver Stadium, which would be a delightful clash. I've
seen people go all doomsday about that matchup. I think those people should watch Carson Beck play some football this year. And I think Penn State fans would feel fine about it.
Well, here's what, and I wrote this a week or two ago about Georgia. I think it was maybe last week in my mailbag. I said, the thing that would scare me about Georgia if I was a Penn State fan was that they've got enough talent on that roster that they can get hot at the right point, right? But again, Carson Beck has shown some not so hot moments, some flaws.
He's been really bad several times when it matters this year.
I'm trying to be against
Texas, when they beat Texas pretty soundly. The only reason it was kind of close for a bit was because Carson Beck kept it close.
The other part of this, which I think we're going to see and hear more of as the weather starts to turn here in late November, is bringing an SEC team to an outdoor stadium in the Northeast where weather could be a factor. We heard about it on the broadcast last week with Tennessee, that it was 55 degrees and players were trying to line up in front of the heater. And I laughed when they said that during the broadcast. But that, I think, is a factor. But again, with this whole argument and the Big Ten bias versus the SEC bias and those types of things, what I think we're going to get from the playoff this year is perhaps, maybe, and we'll see how it shakes out, maybe a bit of better understanding perhaps from the folks in the SEC, that the people here in the Big Ten and Big Ten country where you and I reside, that there is a crazy level of passion that exists here as well, that I think a lot of people in the SEC are just kind of blinded to because, again, SEC football, they, it's king, it's this and that.
Just means more.
Just means more. People in the Big Ten care a hell of a lot about it too. And I think there are going to be some opportunities if both conferences and their fans have their eyes and minds open to it, big if, to try and experience some of these other campuses and cultures and fan bases and just kind of how serious other schools take it as well. So I think that's going to be a bit of a case study that we see play out here in the month of December.
One thing I wanted to mention too, I keep seeing Georgia used as the comparison point for Big Ten schools, which I think is probably incorrect because I do think they're the best team in the SEC. So if you're going to compare Georgia with a Big Ten team, you should probably compare them with Oregon or Ohio State. If you want to talk about like for like from if you're going to do these are the best teams argument, it's probably like compare Tennessee and Penn State, or Tennessee and Indiana, or Alabama and Indiana, or Alabama and Penn State. And I do think on a neutral site, those games would be very close. Like, I think they would be coin flip matchups. So this argument that, well, it's Alabama, they got to be ranked higher than Indiana, even if they have one more loss, if Indiana ends up losing to Ohio State. Like, again, we're going to end up having this argument next week. I think if Indiana loses to Ohio State, but it's very dumb because it's using Georgia as this benchmark when Georgia is, if you're judging it how people are making that argument want to judge it, the best team in the SEC. And so I think it's all very disingenuous. And I think you are right. I think people are going to be alarmed when they see how much it matters to folks in Big Ten territory too, in the Midwest and the North. Like this means a whole hell of a lot to them. And I think I am very excited to see teams from the South have to play in December in Beaver Stadium, in December in Bloomington or in South Bend. I think those things could get interesting. And again, the idea of a space heater in 59 degrees is, I mean, I need
What are
the
we
air
doing?
conditioner. If it's 59, I'd probably need the air conditioner still.
It's 55-ish here today. Maybe even higher. Maybe like we might be close to 60.
59 right
And
now.
59. And I was like, wow, it's so nice out that I,
Feels
in a
great.
sweatshirt, am going to put my Christmas lights out. So again, like this is regular northern behavior.
How much
because
you want to
like,
bet that
Mhm.
becomes a complaint? Like there will be somebody, if an SEC team loses in Beaver Stadium or in Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, like there will be a, well, it was so cold. That's not how football should be played kind of argument that comes out of. I guarantee
We
you
couldn't
it
catch the
will.
ball because our hands were cold, right? Like one of
Yeah.
those arguments. And it is so stupid because we heard this a lot during Big Ten expansion too. Like players at the next level, you're gonna have to play in the elements, you have to play in the heat, you're gonna have to play in the cold. Like, let's just let Indiana have their moment, right? Let State College, if Penn State is posting, let them have their moment. I just this whole discourse, I'm already done with it, John.
Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our good friends over at Roback. As you can tell right here on the shoulder of the hoodie I'm wearing, I frequently wear Roback. It is some of my favorite clothes to wear. I wear
No,
the,
John, it's not frequent. It's the only thing you
yeah.
wear.
To be fair, Eagles hat today, switched it up a little bit, but yes, it is for the most part all I wear. The performance hoodies, performance polos, performance joggers, performance shorts. I wear them all. Golf course, relaxing, work all the time. It's comfortable. It looks nice. It is my favorite thing I can get. And with the holiday season around the corner, you can get Roback too and you can get 20% off your first order over at roback.com with code TND20. That's TND20 as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. But yeah, I will most certainly be requesting some more Roback apparel as we get to the holidays.
And John, if people don't even want to think about what to purchase, they can go to Roback's holiday collection where they've got a list of some of the best-selling items. They also sell socks and duffel bags, hats and visors. I was unaware of the duffel bags, John, so I look forward to you probably having a Roback duffel bag soon.
You shouldn't have told me that. You really shouldn't have told me that. I will be getting a Roback duffel bag. And you can get one too over at roback.com, and you can get 20% off your first order with code TND20. Now, back to the show. The one thing I will say too is a team like Indiana being undefeated or going 11-1 used to be the coolest thing about college sports, like the Cinderella story that nobody saw coming. When did we lose that part of college athletics that made so much of it so great? Like, is everyone out here during the NCAA tournament just rooting for every number 1 and 2 seed every week? Like, to me, this is part of the excitement of an expanded field is you have teams like Indiana. Sure, maybe it's because they played the middle and bottom of the Big Ten rather than the top of the Big Ten. That's not on them. Like this will happen from time to time. And guess what? There are 12 spots. Like if you want to make the playoff, you are in full control of your destiny as every single team in this country, except for maybe Army. And even Army might be if they beat Notre Dame this weekend. Like I just think the goalposts have been moved to with this idea that if you want to make the argument that 11-1 Indiana shouldn't be in a 4-team playoff, if it comes down to it, sure, I understand that. The point of the 12-team playoff was to get this exact type of team into the discussion and into the playoff. And they should be in whether they win or lose against Ohio State, and they should, assuming they beat Purdue. If they lose to Purdue, well, that's all.
Yeah, we got bigger problems there.
Yes, but I think they should be in no matter what happens this weekend.
Yes, and that is a perfect segue to what I wanted to hit on. I've been asked by, and I'm sure you have as well, by a lot of Penn State fans in the last couple weeks. Okay, Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State fans, who do you root for? Who should you root for? I do want to point out before we dive into this, people were asking us Saturday about the convoluted Big Ten tie-breaking procedures. Can we just celebrate that it took Oregon several days to finally figure out and acknowledge that they made
not Oregon, the Big Ten. It took the Big Ten several days.
Yeah, it took the Big Ten several days to figure out that one team has already clinched a spot in the Big Ten title game. Again, Oregon wins Saturday night in Madison. They're posting a graphic on Twitter Tuesday night saying, oh, hey, by the way, Oregon clinched a spot at Lucas Oil Stadium. Okay, you might want to rethink your tie-breaking procedures and all of that if this is kind of how convoluted it gets, because it is very messy. And
it makes me feel better. about our discussion Saturday night when we kind of stalled out because we couldn't figure it out. Well, if they've got a whole staff of people and it took them 48 hours, then I feel
But
fine
you've
about it
got
taking us a
people
couple
who
minutes.
this is like their full-time job trying to figure out, okay, seating procedures, we put this tiebreaker in place for the X, Y, and Z. Like, no, like that's on them to figure it out. But in terms of Ohio State, Indiana, Saturday at noon, okay, so I think there's a couple different ways you can think about this. If you want to think in terms of Penn State's slim chance to get to Indianapolis, right? To get to the Big Ten title game. Again, it still means Penn State needs to win out, but they need a lot of help, right? At this point, Indiana has not lost a game. So, John, what do Penn State fans need to happen if they want to get to Indianapolis? I'm teeing you up for this one.
This is pretty straightforward. They need Ohio State to beat Indiana and then lose to Michigan.
Yes.
And Penn State, obviously, to win the last 2 games. And they will end up in the Big Ten title game. And I think people will be pretty dismissive of that. But let's say Ohio State wins this weekend, right? I think a lot of people are assuming that. Maybe we shouldn't. I don't know. But if it goes to next week's game against Michigan, Michigan's bad this year. No way around it. I have been on that hype train since long before the season started.
The game.
Right. And even if you think this is a bad Michigan team, they've got what, a 15% chance, a 20% chance. That's rolling a die with 5 sides and landing on a number, right? Like that is, it is still within the realm of possibility that Penn State makes the Big Ten title game, and a legitimate possibility. Greater than 50%, absolutely not. Greater than 20%, probably not. It's probably like a 5 to 10% chance right now before Ohio State, Indiana. But that is still absolutely on the table. If I were a Penn State fan, I would be rooting for that because you want to win as many things as you can win, and getting a bye or having the chance to get a bye in the first round, I think would be, immensely valuable, right? The athletic department isn't going to make enough money off a playoff game for it to impact it one way or the other, I don't think. But I think that is immensely valuable. The other direction, of course, is rooting for the team not to make it. And frankly, that's no fun.
So again, to be clear, if you're rooting, which I think if you're listening to us, I'm assuming care about Penn State, although you never know. Sometimes we get some.
We have some Oregon and Ohio State fans that tune in. We appreciate that.
We get some folks who kind of come in on the phrase every now and again to hear some maybe outlandish takes. I'm sure we're probably going to attract SEC people.
I was going to say,
yeah, I think
the comments on this one are going to be a pretty tough go if I had to guess.
But yeah, I would say root for Ohio State to beat Indiana this week, and then Ohio State to lose next week to Michigan. Now, Indiana plays Purdue the following week.
They're going to win that game.
You've got the rivalry aspect of it, but
they could play 11-on-8, and I think Indiana would win that game. I think Curt Cignetti especially is going to lean into the rivalry aspect, and they might beat them 73-0. Like I think this is a chance they don't pull their starters at all. Like they just hammer them and prove a point and winning. I'm not kidding when I say 73-0. By the way, I think that's legitimately on the table.
Now here's the other kind of side of this, right? If Indiana wins, now, John, does Penn State still, do you think, host a playoff game, or are they now maybe getting kicked down and potentially going to play on the road?
There's almost no world where they don't host a playoff game because Ohio State.
If Indiana wins, Ohio State's getting bumped.
Probably below Penn State, and Indiana jumps ahead of Penn State, leaving Penn State exactly where they are as the number 6 seed in the bracket. Okay. I think the only way I think they even aren't the 6th seed at this point. So to me, by far the most likely scenario to lay this out is that Penn State is the number 6 seed hosting a playoff game against the number 11 seed in the first round. And that is because if Penn State makes it, they're probably winning these last 2 games, right? Maybe they lose to Minnesota and still get in, but at that point, probably not, I would think. But if they're 11-1, they take care of Minnesota, take care of Maryland. They're not going to move down artificially, right? Someone else would have to jump them. The most likely scenario for them to move down in the rankings, when it comes to the bracket specifically, I'm not talking about the actual top 25, is for Texas to win out and then lose in the SEC title game. That pushes whoever Texas plays in the SEC title game into that number 2 seed in all likelihood. And then Texas would then be either the 5 or the 6, with the loser of the Big Ten title game being the 5 or the 6, and then Penn State being number 7. Right. And that bumps them down a spot. And they're still hosting, though. They're just hosting the 10 seed. I will say there's a very big difference between the 6 and the 7 seed because of who you play in the second round. I want nothing to do with that 7 seed if I'm a fan of any program, because you're getting the SEC champ in all likelihood, or you're getting Oregon or Ohio State. Like, it is far more appealing to face the ACC champ or the Big 12 champ as the 3 or the 4 seed if you're the 5 or the 6 than it is to go the other way. So I do think there's a significant advantage to being one of those top 2 at-large spots where Penn State is positioned to be, I think, unless that happens where Texas wins out and loses in the SEC title game.
So, John, you and I are having all this discourse about seeding and conferences and all this fun stuff about playoff games in December. Oh, yeah, you just hit on it. If Penn State doesn't beat Minnesota this weekend, and I wanted to pull this up while you were talking, per our Austin mock at The Athletic, if Penn State beats Minnesota this weekend, then the Nittany Lions per mock have a 97% chance to make the playoff field. With a loss, they're at 63%. Again, that's per Austin's projection.
That's interesting.
There are a lot of different other, projecting services out there. But yeah, pretty much if you win this weekend in Minneapolis, you're basically in, unless
you lose to Maryland. If you lose to Maryland, you shouldn't be in anyways. So
yeah. So there's that. We talked with Drew Aller this week. Obviously, we heard from James Franklin. We're recording before practice Wednesday. We'll hear from more players from Franklin again Wednesday night. A couple things struck me during the conversation with Aller. Most of it was bigger picture centered, which I think is good for this time of year, because you want to learn more about the quarterback and how he's physically and mentally prepared kind of for this longer season and for this stretch run. And I thought Aller had some interesting things to say about, obviously, so much of what we've seen play out on the field this year is how he's changed his body and how he's, the increased mobility. And I was asking him, like, what were some of those things throughout the summer that you had to do? He said he had to cut a lot of carbs. He had to spend more time on the treadmill, right? Like, and I think this is something in sports that so often maybe we just kind of forget about because we get wrapped up in the performance and the results. But like, there had to be moments, this spring, this summer, while Drew Aller is doing this stuff, where it was like, man, I am not enjoying this at all. This really sucks. Like any normal person on a diet / like body regimen change plan, just kind of the human element of that. And so I thought it was really insightful. He kind of laid out, that he's a morning guy. He's in the facility all day, however long it takes, watching all this film, but still is adamant that he has to get at least 7 hours of sleep every night. Oh yeah, these guys are also, full-time student athletes. There's that kind of part of this that often gets lost in the shuffle. But yeah, I just thought that we heard some interesting kind of behind the scenes things with Drew and his progression. And I'll have a story up on that next week on The Athletic. I've been diving into other fun things related to Penn State, Minnesota this week. That I'll have out very shortly. But I thought it was interesting to hear. Last week we heard from Danny O'Brien, and he outlined, how he thought Drew has grown and progressed. And then, this week you hear it from Drew, and you're just kind of like, yeah, there were a lot of changes that went on behind the scenes for this guy this offseason.
I'm so envious of at least 7 hours of sleep.
Could John, you do this to yourself. You could get 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep if you wanted. You choose to live like a vampire. That's the thing. Right?
That's not true. I get my 4 to 5 hours a night, and I am perfectly
by choice, right? Like you could go to bed at midnight if you wanted. And
the travel is really what messes it up. Like you know what I mean? Like we, like this weekend, my flight into Minnesota is at 6 a.m. and my flight out of Minnesota is at 6 a.m. And as you mentioned, I'm a night person. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself.
That's the thing, John. You got to make the shift, right? So as I've gotten older, I've become more of like a normal hours person, or I try to, because our jobs don't make any sense.
I like being up at night.
See, no, you got to ditch that because like I'll try to get to bed by like 11:30, midnight, and then you got to pick and choose your spots. Like if I have a chance to sleep in, I'm taking that spot and I'm sleeping in. But yeah, you like I know this weekend I didn't book a flight at 6 a.m. because I knew it'd be terrible.
Yes.
And now I'll get that on the way back. I have an earlier no, I don't think I don't fly back at 6 a.m. I'm wrong. I have to drive to Harrisburg this week, just like the Nittany Lions when they fly across the country. I am driving to Harrisburg on Friday and returning on Sunday for a nonstop flight. But yeah, it's challenging, and you got to kind of pick and choose your spots. And I say this because I looked. My former colleague at the Athletic, now at On Three, Andy Staples, he tweeted something Wednesday morning, which was a really good jarring reminder. The early signing period starts 2 weeks from Wednesday.
I know.
Let me lay this out for a second because this has been on my mind, right?
Who did this to us?
I don't know, but
I want names.
Well, I was going to say something and I'm not going to say it because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and I'm not saying it, but someone decided this and whoever decided this is a monster, right?
They're a bad person. They should know that.
Yeah. So you've got the conference championship games are the first weekend of December, right? The 8th. I think it's the first weekend, 8th, 9th. Yeah, 7th.
Yes, the 8th.
Yeah, that's the first weekend. Then you've got the early signing period is that Wednesday. But before the early signing period, you have the transfer portal opening that Monday. So in like a 3-4 day span, you're going to figure out who your conference champions are. If you're in the 12-team playoff, what your seeding is, because you'll find that out Sunday, the day after the conference title games. Or like your regular bowl selection, because oh yeah, that still happens now. There still are non-playoff bowl games happening.
By the way, people mentioned those losing value if the playoff expanded, and I was like, no, that won't be the case. I have forgotten about other bowl games. I'm not gonna lie; they don't really matter at all now.
Yeah, can you imagine? It's like, oh, you're playing. I don't even know if it's still a thing. Like in the Boca Raton Bowl, like. Great.
Opt out. Do yourself a favor. As a team, as a program, opt
Everyone
out.
Collectively pull back.
Just head home. It's fine.
But you're gonna have all the bowl selection stuff, and then you're gonna have the portal opening the day after bowl selection, which is gonna be a fascinating experiment and who stays, who goes if you're on a playoff team. But hey, you got to get somewhere else by the time the semester starts in January. Do you even go through the motions with your playoff team? Typically, once a player enters their name in the portal, I guess there's not a nice way to say that. They're pretty much dead to the current team that they're on at that point. Like hey, you're in the portal, you put your name in and go clean out your locker. Like you're planning to move on. Now,
I am betting
go ahead.
that we see this year players, plural, in the quarterfinals playing for teams, not specifically Penn State, just for any of the 8 teams in the quarterfinals that are in the transfer portal. Because that will be January 1st, December 31st, right? And the last day to go in is December 29th. Yeah. So if you can hold off your decision until after the first round of the playoffs. That's players are capable of doing that. But the 29th is the last day to go in. And if you're going to go in, you got to go in and the team needs you still. Like there's a chance you go in, play in the quarterfinal, and they're at a new school by the time the semifinal starts. I'm going to go ahead and say they need to fix the transfer portal window because it's incorrect.
Yeah, the window's going to be brutal. And then you're going to have your signing period on top of that, all in that week. Like just the next month, right? Because today's November 20th. On-campus playoff games will be happening a month from now. Like this is going to be a crazy stretch, the craziest stretch that this sport has ever seen. And there's just so many levels and layers to it. So, John, if you're not sleeping well now, it's not going to get any better in the next month.
Here's the thing, though. Now I'm just well adjusted to never sleeping. So this is what my life is at this point. But we should
Minnesota?
probably – I was going to say we should get into this Minnesota game. The Golden Gophers are middle of the pack in the Big Ten, have a legitimately good defense. They're top 25 in SP+, I believe, last I checked. Turn the ball over or force a lot of turnovers. That's something James Franklin hammered home a lot. At the end of the day, though, this is a team that Penn State should beat. They have Coy Parrish. Their safety has been fantastic. The freshman safety has 5 of their interceptions that they've gotten this year. But he is not enough for this to completely stop this Penn State offense, right? Drew Aller's been really good about not turning the ball over. The offense in general has been really good about not turning the ball over. Penn State is at a really big talent advantage. They have a coaching advantage. They should win this game going away.
Now, Minnesota is coming off the bye week, right?
Yes.
So they should be fresh. I listened to PJ Fleck's news conference on Tuesday afternoon, and it gets me every time, John. The guy ends his news conference and he hits on all of his like program slogans. It's like, go Gophers, row the boat, sky you mine. And he just rattles them off so crazy fast that I was sitting there listening at the end. I was just like, what are we doing? But that's his thing.
That guy's got a lot of energy.
A lot of energy, a lot of slogans. Like I remember when Penn State was there in 2022, was it?
I think so.
Maybe
2021. No, what?
No, it would have been before.
No, it would have been 2020. No, sorry. No. It was 2019. It was 2019 because it was the Cotton Bowl year. Yes, and they threw the pick. Penn State threw the pick late. That could have been a touchdown to win it, I believe.
And I believe that was the Rashad Bateman game where he had like a gazillion yards.
I loved Rashad Bateman. He was
Penn
so
State
good.
lost. I remember I was there. I covered the game.
They had Tyler Johnson, I think Chris Ottman-Bell, I think. And like the really good trio receivers.
And they were like a good Minnesota team. And I just remember, this is where I was going with this, walking through. I love their stadium. I think it's really cool. If any fans are listening to us that are going to the game this weekend, I think you'll have a great experience because it's like a nice, modern, well done stadium. Like it's really one of the better venues. But walking through like the lower levels of the stadium, because I think I was coming off the field from pregame or something, and there's just all these slogans plastered everywhere throughout the building. And it's like, okay, we've got a lot of slogans around here. Got it. So yeah, Minnesota, I think you look at this and you say there's upset potential because flex teams always seemingly get better teams and find a way to get them on the ropes. But again, if Penn State is indeed this superior team that we believe they are, which again, this program has shown time after time that they are very capable of taking care of business against teams they should take care of business against. So I think there's that aspect to it. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the thing that I have been working on the last like week and a half is the fact that this is a trophy game this week, John. The Governor's victory bell is at stake Saturday, and no one seems to know. No one seems to care. James,
I think appropriately
for sure, 100%. It's one of two trophy games for the Nittany Lions. The other one, of course, being the Land Grant Trophy, which Penn State is not playing for this year, of course, because of the expanded Big Ten. I've got a thorough, lengthy, very humorous look at the Governor's Victory Bell Trophy that'll be up Thursday on The Athletic, and why in the world Penn State and Minnesota play a trophy game, the origins behind it. I spoke with the gentleman who was the acting governor of Pennsylvania at the time when this trophy was put in place, because he was filling in for Bob Casey Sr. Because Bob Casey Sr., I didn't know this, John, in 1993, he was recovering from a double organ transplant. He had a heart transplant and a liver transplant at the same time, but the man was adamant that Penn State play for a trophy game. So then the fill-in, the acting governor, then like inherited this, and he was a Penn State alum and the acting governor. And so then he was like, hey, like, okay, I guess I got to see this through. So I talked to him this week. Penn State fans might remember this. Minnesota fans definitely will. But in 2013, when the Gophers beat the Nittany Lions, got the Governor's victory bell, Minnesota broke it. And like the piece of wood just came totally torn apart. I talked to the gentleman who broke the trophy. I've tracked him down. We had a very good conversation, funny conversation. But again, that'll be up. But no, Penn State's players are not aware that this is a trophy game. I asked Drew Aller about it on Wednesday, and he was very honest and said, I know there's a trophy, but I don't even know the name of it, which is really like the perfect way
when
you think about the Governor's victory bell, because again, Penn State's place in this Big Ten has been fascinating for such a long time.
When
So
people
I
have
think,
been clearly trying to force a rival onto Penn State for much longer
yes,
than
and none of
just
them have
these last
worked.
10 years. Yeah.
Like, you've got the natural thing with Pitt, but that's gone by the wayside. So yeah, Penn State has a chance to take the governor's victory bell with them to Minnesota and then bring it back as well. And yes, there were some legitimate concerns and questions as to whether or not Penn State would even remember that they need to take the trophy with them this weekend, because it is just not even anywhere close to top of mind.
Right where it should be. Let's get into predictions for the game. I'll let you go first this week. Prediction and who we're talking about on Sunday or Saturday. Actually, probably Saturday night.
Hopefully Saturday night. I've got Penn State 27, Minnesota 13. And John, because I've felt that, for a couple weeks with my player to watch, I've kind of been laying low or trying to pick different people and this and that. No, I've gotten to the point of the season where I'm just kind of angry picking people right now because I just want to be right. So you know who we're going to talk about Sunday? Tyler Warren, because we're always talking about Tyler Warren. So that's my prediction, 27, Minnesota 13. Penn State 27, Minnesota 13, and we're talking about Tyler Warren on Sunday.
So I'm very glad to hear we did not have the exact same score, but I have Penn State winning 28-10. That is, I think, both of us Penn State covering and the under for both, for those interested in such things. And I don't think we will be talking first about Tyler Warren Saturday night. I think we will be talking about Nick Singleton because this is the kind of game that Penn State is going to have to control on the ground. I think he is on the verge of a massive performance. He has looked healthier. They obviously limited his carries against Purdue because they could, and you should for your running backs when you can. I think Singleton is in for a really big game that kind of puts him on the map nationally kind of game. And I think he goes off for over 100 yards, multiple rushing scores. He has a chance to be the best player on the field Saturday, excuse me. And I think he will play like it, at least, even if Warren is, the best player on the team.
So yeah, that's why we'll be talking about Tyler Warren on Sunday.
Easy way out, as far as I'm concerned.
I know. I took Nick Singleton last week, so this.
I am really curious about where this spread is at and where this over under is at, though. It opened at, I think, 11.5. The spread's now 12.5. Still probably not enough. I just don't see this Minnesota offense scoring against Penn State's defense. Even giving them a touchdown, making it 28-10. I was like, is 10 too much? It should be 28-6 or 21-6 or something like that. The over-under of 45.5, I think, only gets over if Penn State is doing the heavy lifting on that one. I think that is way too high of a number, 35-14 or something like that. Just really, I mean, a good chance that I'm just viewing this game the wrong way, but I think these are two strong defensive teams that lead this to be a low-scoring game pretty much no matter what.
I'm searching this right now, John, because I had looked earlier in the week because anytime you're going to Minnesota, I feel obliged to look at the weather.
Right.
No, looks fine. Looks okay. In fact, I might even say it looks kind of delightful on Saturday. Low of 38, high of 46, which seems very warm for me for this time of year out there. 24% chance of precipitation. Honestly, when I looked earlier in the week, it was much worse. So
yeah,
46
snowing,
I can handle with winds west northwest at 10 to 20 miles per hour.
Snowing back in these parts on Friday. Glad to be getting out of town before that one. But we will be out of town and we will be covering that game in Minneapolis. And we will be back after it on Saturday night to discuss everything that happened in Minnesota, either Penn State all but locking up its berth to the college football playoff or an absolute catastrophe unfolding. One way or the other, we'll be here. But as I said, if you want to find Audrey's writing, you can find everything she does over at The Athletic. You can find her on Twitter at OddSnyder4 and on Blue Sky if you search Audrey Snyder. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber and on Blue Sky with the name John Sauber. Again, there's no H in John. You can find all my writing over at centerdaily.com. That's CENTRE. My game preview will be up Thursday morning, I would guess, either not long after or around when this is up for you to listen to. We will be back. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. As always, hit that thumbs up button, the subscribe button down below if you're watching on YouTube. But until Saturday, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.